Okay, well, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Thank you very much for having me. I'm humbled and flattered. And thank you very much for giving the time at the end of a Monday or a Tuesday, or wherever we are in the week, at this time of day. So I'm going to broadly put this important building, the first purpose-built public record repository in the British Isles, amongst the oldest archive buildings in the world. Thinking of the Vatican archive as well. We've got Register House here in Scotland. It's not to be underestimated, not to be undervalued, to be championed. So if you could leave this building raising your fist in the air and say, way to Register House, no way should this ever become a pub or hotel. I'll be very, very grateful, very, very grateful if you could write letters to your councillors beating them away from the place. I will focus in on the historical context of the building, as Veronica said, and I will probably dip into my pool of curiosity into the people who actually built the place. So I'm not about to sing a song about Robert Adam. My elders and betters can do that much better than I ever will be able to. But I can talk a little bit about the people who worked for him, if that's okay with you. So there's 13 slides. If I begin to get boring, just start counting slides. And you know you're getting towards the end. There might even be a 14th just to surprise you. So in terms of context, the 1707 Treaty of Union guaranteed that the national records remained in Scotland. They didn't go south. In 1722, a proper home for Scotland's public records was first proposed. However, at this time, Scotland's National Archives were housed in an unsuitable accommodation in Scotland's Parliament House to the other side of the city. There were various Edinburgh Town Council committee reports, and the architect first to consider the proposition of having a new town plan, a new Register House, I contend, would be Alexander McGill, who was the city's architect. He probably knew about the idea and the proposal, and certainly to place the Register House on this side of the city, McGill was involved in developing the first new town plans as a response to the bubonic plague threat of 1720 to 1721. And to put it in context of the kind of things we might expect Register House to hold, we've got the Faculty of Advocates collection, we've got the Writers to the Signet Library, founded in 1599, and we've got wider important legal archives in terms of the political management of the city, and by that I'm referring to Archibald Campbell, the Earl of Islay, later 3rd Duke of Argyll. He's the first governor of the Royal Bank of Scotland from 1727. Keen Hanoverian and pro-unionist, and why not? 1710 Lord Justice General, 1711 appointed to the Privy Council, 1714 Lord Clerk Register, 1721 Keeper of the Privy Seal of Scotland, 1726 the Faculty of Medicine at University of Edinburgh founded through him, 1727 Royal Bank of Scotland again, and 1733 Keeper of the Great Seal of Scotland. And is there any surprise that if you want legal archive, this is the building to come? With slight variation. I've got limited amount of time, but I will try and go slower. If you want legal archive, Edinburgh is the place to come. This is a good building to go to. So is the Writers to the Signet Library. So is the Faculty of Advocates Library. So is the National Library of Scotland's manuscripts. So, then there was also the fact that Robert Walpole, the Prime Minister, gave Campbell control over the royal patronage of Scotland and Scottish political affairs. He became widely considered to be the most powerful man in Scotland. 1724 to 25, despite the tax crises and riots in Scotland over those years, Campbell remains in power. Meanwhile, in Edinburgh, if Campbell is in power in Edinburgh, George Drummond is our man of the town council. Edinburgh Town Council and Parliament. Drummond is the man who sets McGill up as the town council architect between 1720 and 1725. And he's the one who gets a hold of this idea of Edinburgh having its new town and making it his cause. He's the one who always celebrates the idea. In 1720, he's the one who goes down to London and sets a plan in order, which include planning for new housing on this side of the city, on these fields, for a number, and I quote, number of persons of note and character. In 1728, though, just 8 years later, the idea is developed when a petition is sent to James Hamilton, the 5th Duke of Hamilton, to address a new town, to have a register house. So on the menu on the 1728 petition included rebuilding Leith Pier, making the Nor Loch a canal, bridging the Nor Loch to the fields to the north, and having a register house, and instituting several necessary professions of liberal arts and sciences, which included increasing university professor salaries, which I'm sure they'd approve of. So that there's developing context for why this is important. The question was, how do you pay for it? That's one important contextual question. Usually public works were paid for by what they called the ale tax, which was 2p on every pint of beer. But the ale tax wasn't going to meet the costs of such a large scheme, because Edinburgh's new town was to be the largest urban development planning programme in the United Kingdom. London had its developments, but nothing on a corporate scale under the patronage of a town council such as George Drummond envisioned. It was a real planting the flag into the ground and saying, we are here for union, we are here to be part of Britain. And that was in another light of the threat of Jacobitism. George Heriot's Hospital, which is still here, of course, a great school, just like George Watson's Hospital, and other great schools, comes to the rescue. It offers land, because if funding the scheme is an issue, so is finding the land to build it on, and the town council did not own all the property on this side of the city. So George Heriot Hospital comes to the fore, and the town council is able to do a deal with George Heriot Hospital to get the land to build the new town on. In theory, George Drummond's own property in Barony might have been developed as well as part of the new town. So he would have been technically a few superior and someone who could have made a little money on the side. But that never happened, folks. That's just an aside. So we come to the actual development of the site plan, and there's no sign of a register house in John Lorry's surveys he did for the town council. John Lorry was a surveyor in 1766. The new town has been marked, but a later site plan coming along doesn't indicate anything of a new town with a register house in these early stages of planning and surveying. It remains an idea. Even here on James Craig's official plan of the new town, we just have over here on the bridge, we have absolutely nothing. So it's a bit of an anomaly. There is a plan for a package for Parliament to ratify to extend the city, which the city's MP, James Coote, working under the patronage of the Earl of Bute, manages to push through, and I'll come on to that later. So we've still got the idea of a register house without having a register house. So far, so good? So we've got up to 29th of July, 1767, without a site, just an idea that they would like to have one. So we come on to a variant on what was to be on the site before Register House, and this is the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh, Sir James Clerk of Pennacook, and I'm grateful to the Clerk of Pennacook's family for permission to use their archive and publication and talks, to plan their new hall and library, and they got permission from Edinburgh Town Council to locate it at the northern terminus of the new bridge over the Nor Loch. This is the site of Register House. So that building was to face on to the terminus of the bridge that was being built to William Milne's plan before Register House got here. Sir James Clerk had followed his father's interest in architecture and building, saw himself as an educated and trained architect, a noble gentleman who had taste and skills as a designer. The letter he wrote to the Town Council's North Bridge Committee in March 1765 gives the impression of the influence he must have had over magistrates as they mulled over 22 plans that had been submitted in the competition to plan the new town. Clark said, "I think it's the duty of everyone, more particularly of those who by birth and education are nearly connected with it, at least to endeavour to contribute their mite towards the completion of a work so necessary and at the same time so very ornamental to the city. The gentlemen candidates have overlooked the state of building proper for such a work, which the ancient Greeks and Romans still point to us in remains of the aqueducts and buildings, ... And he continues, the best of the moderns here likewise made use of this style. I have taken the liberty to send your lordship a sketch of this style for the intended communication. I suggest it might well have been this building that he was sticking under their noses. He wrote another note in which he announced that it would be, in my opinion, add much more lustre to the intended communication were a piece of ground to the north extremity of it on the height of Moultries Hill allocated a church and spire, or perhaps for a library of the College of Physicians, intend to build with its portico fronting towards the centre of the communication. Buildings, when properly situated, redouble their effects. Ta-da! Now, there's some fairly decent evidence that Clarke is promoting his own project. Would you agree? Yeah, I thank you for nodding. I thank you. The president of the Royal College of Physicians, Sir Alexander Dick, was already a supporter of Edinburgh's improvement and was a trustee of the programme set out in the 1753 Act. I have no time to go into the details of that, other than think of the council building today, which was the exchange building of that time and of that process. He joined Sir James in February 65 to judge plans of the new town. Both men joined forces to plan and build the college's new library. The physicians were to petition the council for the plot at the north end of the new bridge in August, and they asked Sir James to design it. The descriptions of the plans are given in the college's successful petition to the this plot in the town council minutes, which quote Dr. Boswell's description of the librarian's department, a consulting room, reading and waiting rooms, and a room for under officers. All these marked on Clarke's plan, which the doctors thought elegant and magnificent and comparable to the Pantheon. Certainly the elevation shows that Clarke was inspired by this Roman building, and the college was prepared to build the new town's first public building on the site Clarke wanted most in the new town, which is here. This was the building that was replaced on site by Robert Adams' Register House, which has also got a dome design. Hooray! Okay. Physicians thought Clarke was a worthy and ingenious architect, and in 1771 they sought out Sir John Pringle to see if the king would give money to build Clarke's building. Pringle noted, I was glad to hear that you had so good an architect as Sir James Clarke, both for taste, solidity, and economy, but he was unable to secure the king's assent and purse to pay for the building. That's because Register House had gazumped them, and I'll come on to this in a moment. I could go on, I've got over 30 pages of notes, but I have no time to read you a bedtime story. This is meant to pep you up before tea time. So, we have a but. And can we press the next slide? Before I get on to Adam's building, we have a but in the process of the new town plan itself, and the but is this. To get the new town built wasn't as simple as the town council just having a plan by James Craig and just, we'll just build that. They needed an Act of Parliament to pass through the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And there's a fly in the ointment to this wonder plan, this gridded plan by James Craig, and the idea, just the idea of having a register house and gently elbowing the College of Physicians idea off the table. And that's that the Earl of Morton, who is the clerk of registers, didn't want a new town at all. He just wanted a register house. And this caused what we would call in Glasgow a bit of a stooshy. And though it's not registered and recorded in Hansard or any record of Parliament debates in early 1767, you would have thought the Act just passed through seamlessly. What we have is a series of letters, rather desperate letters, written between Lord Provost Gilbert Lorry and James Coutts and others involved with passing the Newtown Bill and Act through Parliament. And they touch upon the force of opposition that the Earl of Morton had managed to raise against the Act. What this does is firmly put the idea of having a register house in the new town again. It had been an idea in the 1720s. It seemed to have drifted off by the time they got to planning the new town in 1766. By the time we're coming back into having the Act passed through Parliament in the summer of 67, the idea is getting surfaced again, but through opposition to it. So there's a series of conflicts and contrast to what's actually important about the new town. And of course, we end up with an alliance of Register House and Newtown, so Morton is eventually defeated. An onlooker, this is just a gossiper, commented that Lord Morton has a dispute with the College of Physicians, that'll be the clerk project, the occasion of which is this: it seems they propose to sell their hall and gardens near the Cowgate port to build a new hall and library in the new town, the place for which they are fixed opposite to the bridge, the very place his lordship says he chooses for the public offices. That'll be Register House. Oh, there will be a pretty squabble about it, as he sat back and rubbed his hands and couldn't wait for the newspapers to be delivered. So, what we have with Robert Milne, this is Robert Milne's plan for Register House. This is the building you could have had but you didn't get, is that Robert Milne is also playing a canny game because he wants work out of this major building project, the new town. He didn't get this, but at the same time he's got Gilbert Lorizu saying, well, I'll show you how to design the houses for the new town. He wanted work on either side of the coin. Whichever way it landed, he was going to try and make sure he got something out of this. Unfortunately, he didn't get anything out of this. He didn't get to design the houses. That's a different story altogether. Can I get the next slide, please? So this is James Craig's plan again, and this time it's all coloured in. It's green. It's not just monochrome, it's green. And this is the plan that's in the King's Cabinet. This is in the British Museum Library collection. And although you can't see it, just believe me, it says Register House. This is evidence that by December or winter 1767, where Craig is in London to present the plan to the king and the court and the king's architects, Sir William Chambers, Robert Adam, the others, to get the royal assent for this to happen, that Register House has been given its location. Even though I know the textbooks say nothing is decided until 69, nothing is built until 74, this indicates to me that the powers that be have decided this is the site. So from then on, James Clerk's project is a little bit doomed. It's really doomed because the Royal College of Physicians never signed the Few Charter. So there was a bit of a legal slip-up on their point. So it was fairly easy to shuffle them off. So with this Register House trustees only reached an agreement on the site when the city, that's Edinburgh Town Council, gifted it to them. In 1770, Robert Adam wrote a letter to Baron Muir of Caldwell, this is in November, 5th of November 1770, financed to the Court of Exchequer and close to the Earl of Bute and Lord Mount Stuart. He said, "Dear sir, I'm very sorry not to have had it in my power to wait on you at Caldwell," that was Muir's home. "My brother and I went to Buchanan," that's Duke of Montrose's place, "where I stayed 2 days. I had an appointment in Edinburgh about Register House business. This prevented my having the honour to be at your house then, as I had a broken shin, what I met with when I was at Edinburgh on my return from Buchanan." I don't know how he got that. Maybe he spooked the horses. "He confined me to bed for 6 weeks in my room and prevented me from seeing anybody." Evidence in 1771 that Adam is here on Register House business. So that design process, that securing of the site, is quickly followed by Adam following this up for design purposing. Having the new clerk register, Lord Frederick Campbell, MP for Glasgow Boroughs, appoint Robert Adam and James Adam as architects for Register House in 1772. Work commences in 1774. The planning contract is signed off in 1772 with the principal facade and dome rotunda present from the very beginning of the designs. When the contract was signed in 1772, the scheme was reduced in scale, probably for financial reasons. As I did say, I'm not an Adam expert, but experience does tell me that if you gave him a mile, he might want 2 miles. If you gave him 10,000 quid, he said, "I'd do you even better for 20, etc., etc. So maybe they have experience of Adam. It's better to keep him on a fairly short leash. But I think a broader context is that there just wasn't a lot of money around in the city in 1772 because of Douglas Heron and company, the Air Bank crash at the time did scupper a lot of outlay on building projects. I haven't got time to go with that in too much detail. By 1774, of course, American colonists have suddenly decided that it's probably better if they leave the protection of His Majesty's government and do their own thing. So that didn't help the finances. And we've got the Edinburgh Feuars dispute, that's the people who had feus in Edinburgh Newtown, kicking off against Edinburgh Town Council over their administration of the Newtown project at all. All of these things stymie confidence and investment and money and income. So by 1774, we follow the newspapers. We've got newspaper reports of the foundation of Register House. Artillery guns with Captain Ferguson are set off for St James Square. Hooray. That's in June. By August 1776, it's roofed, to be roofed by 1777. So building is progressing, thank you. By 1776, in November, the works of Robert and James Adam, the book of their designs, features Register House. So it's officially in the things what they've done and want to do. And by 1778, there's an extra £2,000 found for building operations, which were then suspended again in 1779. Can I have the next slide? So I think I'm broadly at half-time. I've built you a context, a political, economic, and broad design context of how we got to Register House, how we got to the site, and how Robert Adam claimed that site. Is that clear enough? Okay. I'm now going to talk, oh, there we go. Thank you very much. I should have moved that on, but that's my fault entirely. That's Robert Adams' building from the collection here. I think it's an absolutely fantastic image of Register House. What a draftsman he was. I'll let someone else purr about Robert Adam to you rather than me, but boy oh boy, if you get yourselves the ability to call these plans out and have a look at them for yourselves, do it. They're your plans, it's your collection. On, please. I now want to contextualize some of the builders who were involved in actually constructing this place. So I'm not going to talk about the joy of molding profiles and how they might have changed the world. I'm much more interested in the people who worked for Adam. One of my bugbears in life is people who write books about Edinburgh and they say Robert Adam built Register House. No, he didn't. Never mixed any cement in his life. Never laid a brick. Brilliant draftsman, fantastic conceptualist, fairly lousy businessman, but charming, but not a builder. This man, however, this is David Henderson. Now, this man probably did lay a stone or two. He's a mason from Sochi who came to Edinburgh in the mid-1760s. He's registered in Canongate in 1764. He puts in to be the architect of the bridge over from the old town to the new town, won the competition, but then got removed from the competition because it all cost too much, and William Milne came in instead. Much more reasonable price. But nevertheless, he's involved in the building team that put this building up. Buildings that you can see today that are concerned. David Henderson is just down George Street, so if you go to assembly rooms, David and his son, John Henderson, were involved. Do any of you go to the Botanical Gardens? Inverleith House, that's a David Henderson building. Right? And I could go on. For those of you who are interested in what happens below the ground, the Newtown sewers are a David Henderson plan, and probably me and two other people in the planet were excited when Edinburgh trams were being built and the Princess Street was being raised and the dome arch of these 18th century sewers were revealed, and I had a thigh room in my I thought, that is very good to see. I wish they would go a little further and do some more investigation on it. But he lives in Rose Street, in a little flat, and he is a jobbing architect. He designed the house for James Hunter Blair in New Street. I know New Street's not much to look at today, but back in the 1760s, it was the Des Res. And James Hunter Blair became a very important banker and politician. In the time he worked for him, in 1765-6, he's just good old James Hunter, an Ayrshire merchant banker on the prowl in Edinburgh. But his neighbour was Lord Kames, Henry Home, and Henderson also designed his building as well. So he's doing pretty well down Canongate. He moves to the new town, and he does pretty well for himself here as well. He works, in the Register House accounts, we've got records of David Henderson, John Wilson, who's his overseer, and another man called Robert Ingalls, who's a mason, a bleak builder. Do any of you follow Robert Burns, the poet? So if you go to Carton Hill, you'll see the Burns monument there. You'll see Robert Ingalls. That's the same man. A builder-developer in Edinburgh's first new town, and the second new town, the first houses in Abercrombie Place into the early 1800s. Incorporation tradesmen, that's to say the Mary Chapel, the Incorporation of Rights of Masons of Edinburgh, include William Jameson, plumber Robert Selby, and Slater's James Ramsey, and Adams plasterer or stuccotarian Thomas Clayton, and Clayton we'll touch on later. The first period saw innovations to the new town plan with Register House, the Royal College of Physicians, the Theatre Royal, Shakespeare Square, Canal Street, Thistle Court, and Sir Lawrence Dundas's house, all changing the appearance of Craig's official plan. So you could argue that Register House was the most welcome intrusion and the most useful intrusion of them all. Can I have the next slide, please? And these two I touched upon Ingalls, but James Salisbury really shouldn't be overlooked either. James Salisbury is the Clerk of Works for this building, Clerk of Works for Robert Adam here. He made a model of Register House between 1790 and 1798 based on the 1771 plans. These are now lost. So if any of you Edinburgh sleuths out there fancy a challenge, there's two challenges I'd like to have. First, anyone who can find James Craig's auctions papers from 1795, I'll be very grateful if you'd let me know. And secondly, if you could find James Salisbury's model as well, that would be just great. It's missing somewhere. Someone's got it. We find in the 4th of September 1772, Robert Adam urges the Register House trustees to appoint Salisbury for his honesty, diligence, sobriety and capacity his brother and himself had great experience of in England and London. He was a measurer and surveyor and to be paid £100 a year. He moved up to Edinburgh in November 1772 as the carpenter, more than anything, and as well as overseer. And in 1776, he's doing all the carpentry on the building. So work had already begun before 1774. That's for sure. And he completes it from 1778 to 1785, and the building complete 1789. As far as he was concerned. Salisbury by then was on a reduced wage of £50 a year. He dies in 1798. So he was be part of the group that in Caledonian Mercury newspaper in May 1773 advertised for tradesmen and suppliers and logistics to tender for construction, applied to Mr. Salisbury, his house in St Andrew's Square. So he's taking on the main admin. He's the principal overseer. It's not Robert Adam. It's James Salisbury. So if you approach this building to come in and you admire its dome and you admire its vista and you admire what Register House actually looks like, please think of David Henderson and Robert Ingalls and James Salisbury, especially James Salisbury. And we also find that he begins to take the attention of Edinburgh City Council for its day-to-day administration, the Dean of Guild Court, which deals with neighbours' disputes, and property repairs in 1778 involves David Henderson and James Salisbury and John Wilson to make inspections and reports. So that you could say the Register House boys, the Register House team is on active service in Edinburgh, not just for Register House, but broadly in the administration of architecture. Okay. James Salisbury and Robert Ingalls, though, were both called builders. And they aren't just tied to Register House and that's all they do. You couldn't survive in Edinburgh on 50 quid a year. Not a chance. So they had to extend, and they did extend, and they become property developers and house builders in their own right. They break away from the incorporation of Wrights and Masons of Edinburgh, and they administer a group called the Master Builders of Edinburgh. From the late 1780s into the 1790s. And for a little while, their flame flickers quite nicely, thank you. And it's not until the 1792-93 that the builders began to be sucked back into the incorporation of Wrights and Masons, but that's principally because the incorporation would prosecute them for being what they call unfree men. That's to say they didn't have the rights to work within the city's boundaries. So they're leaders in their field. They're well respected within their field, but they are also responsible for developing properties like this in Queen Street. And this, for those of you who parade up and down Queen Street, will see these kind of facades regularly. So again, when you look at Register House, you might think of James Salisbury, or give him some credit for Queen Street too, and there's other properties to think of as well. In Parliament Square, the domain of Sir William Forbes of Pitsligo, a great banker, great friend of James Hunter Blair. He said in 1780 that Salisbury was the only one for him. He said he's a person in whose skill and integrity we have perfect confidence. And later Salisbury made plans at the bankers' houses and, I quote, set a pattern for the people of Edinburgh to work by in his drawings. So he not only a skilled carpenter, not only a skilled overseer, not only a skilled administrator, but his draftsmanship was good enough for others to be able to follow. These men also had their connections within the builders group in Edinburgh's New Town. I could rattle through a few names, but one is John Brough, a builder, mason. Another is Andrew Neal in the same group, who works with another plasterer called James Nesbitt. And Salisbury himself oversaw Andrew Neal's men in completing buildings in Queen Street to John Brough's design. And Brough told his client that Mr. Salisbury has the direction of your parts of the whole operations to be carried out on the whole house. So people would look up to, his fellow buildings trades would look up to Salisbury. In churches, James Salisbury inspected and reported on Slater's and Wright works of Mr. Ritchie and Coburn, both of whom worked in the New Town, at Mid Calder Church between 1792 and 93. And it could be said that the Society of Master Builders was an indirect result of Ingalls and Salisbury's working together for Robert Adam. Can I get the next slide, please? So here on Leith Street. So the next time you go for a little bowl of ramen at Ramen, the famous Japanese restaurant on Leith Street, please think on James Salisbury and his friend John Baxter, who developed the houses on Leith Street to Robert Adams' design. So there's your next neighbours. So you can see here's an impact just around Register House itself, not only just around Queen Street and other Newtown properties, but as we head around to Leith Street as well. In 1787, Edinburgh's Dean of Gaunt House Salisbury had given plans for 13 houses Robert Adam had designed for Leith Street. These tenements offered work for builders, and Salisbury worked with the slater John Baxter and masons Reed and Thompson to build them. John Baxter and his partner, the mason John Hay, also wanted to build a tavern beside the tenements to the east of Register House. Further development, further work, further impact in this area. There's a petition for James Hill against James Salisbury for the plan of the buildings, which again confirms Salisbury had the plan and elevations for all 13 houses designed by Adams, the architect in London, and subscribed for. Can I get the next slide, please? And a part of this building group, Salisbury, Henderson, Ingalls, Baxter, Wilson, is Thomas Clayton, the stuccotarian and plaster. As soon as you walk outside that building, just all you need to do is lift up your head, see the dome, see the quality of the work that he did. Clayton runs a very complicated practice. There are Claytons here, there are Claytons there. There are Claytons everywhere. There is a West Coast practice where Thomas Clayton from Hamilton and his family work from, and there's a Thomas Clayton here in Edinburgh. And I can't stand in front of you and say I understand it all. All I can see is that it's a big and impressive plastering business, which may have a Thomas Clayton Jr. involved, but no one's actually called him a Thomas Clayton Jr. yet because we need to do a bit of genealogy. Where's the best place to do genealogy? That'll be here, right? So again, the chances or your ability to find out about Scotland's history and Scotland's past and Scotland's people and Scotland's important buildings is right here, right here. So work's there to be done. There is a brilliant PhD student called Emma Bailey who's doing work on Clayton, and I take my hat off to her and I wish her well. Maybe she'll get to the bottom of who's who in the Clayton family. I hope she does. We see the 8 medallions out there in the dome, the total cost of £33, 12 shillings. shipped to Edinburgh from London in 1786. £33. Bargain. Absolute bargain. 5 of them based on antique reliefs depicting Roman marriage and civic ceremonies, and remaining 3 appear on to be contemporary designs illustrating Greek myths and legends. Now, I can't pretend to give you any kind of contexture on icons and iconography. I'll leave that to my elders and betters. But Clayton was the man who bought them and affixed them into the dome. We know from surviving accounts for painting the rotunda that Adam's original decorative scheme was comprised of a stone colour, a slightly off-white. This might be what they called at the time in Edinburgh French grey, though I'm not sure. They were very fond of French grey in their churches and public buildings, and those were offset to white, so you get grey and white. Again, slight monochrome effect. Totally unlike Adam's houses, if you think of the spectacular Robert Ord house at 8 Queen Street. Very sedate, very, very pensive. And then we have iron railings affixed into Register House by Karen and Company. Karen, the Iron Works by Falkirk, a fantastic manufacturer everybody went to use. We see, in terms of further context, George Richardson, who'd worked for the Adam brothers, also published a pattern book of ceiling designs and include the design he made for properties in the new town, include Sir Lawrence Dundas's house, which I'll come to very soon. Richardson and Clayton were both master craftsmen. They hired journeyman plasterers. I don't think Clayton spent too much time up the scaffolds with Hoddle's plaster and lime and the like. I think he probably direct people on what he wanted with patterns. Other people other than architect also need plasterers, and they included builders in the new town. One such plasterer is James Nesbitt, builder, architect, plasterer. Can I get the next slide, please? So to put into context of Register House and what else is going on in these late 1760s, early 1770s, royal architects are here, prestigious architects, the King's architects. We've got Sir William Chambers at Lawrence Dundas's house, which is still a bank, isn't it? That's not a pub or hotel yet. Good. That, what in concept, wasn't just to be Lawrence Dundas's home, it was also to be the home of the Royal Bank of Scotland, because he was the governor of the Royal Bank, and it was also to be the home of Edinburgh Town Council. So he would sit above everything that was a decision-making body in Edinburgh at the time. He was the MP, of course, for the city. So it's a real symbol of power, designed by the King's principal architect, Sir William Chambers. Chambers was also responsible for that building, for Gilbert Meeson, who was a mere merchant in comparison, but nevertheless an aspiring man who managed to talk Chambers into designing his house at 26 St Andrew's Square, and the facade still stands, and there used to be a very nice wooden fireplace in it as well from that period. And in between, of course, we've got Andrew Crosby's house by Robert Adam, which is signed off. This is in the designs in the Soane Museum in London. If you've never been to the Soane Museum, do go. It's an absolute treat. And if you get a chance to go and look at the Adam archive up to the top floor, heaven. So we've got Crosby's house there. It was only ever partially built. He ran out of money, principally thanks to the bank crash. And then further in Queen Street, we've got Robert Ord's house. So with Register House by Robert Adam, King's architect, you can contextualize the beginning of the new town with other really important buildings by the King's architects, Robert Adam and Sir William Chambers too. So Register House is not a standalone important building. There are other really important buildings going on here as well. Next slide, please. Which comes back to my final conundrum is, where's the wooden plan? If it is found, I really hope the ScotGov could find it in their biscuit tin to buy it for the country and display it here so other people can admire the handicraft, skills and work of the people who actually built this property, which has been the principal focus of what my talk's been about. So I hope when you leave here, people like James Salisbury will retain in your frontal lobe for at least until tonight and tomorrow and thereafter. And maybe you'll get into Robert Ingalls, maybe you'll think on the others as well. These guys are men of skill and hard work, and they put their professional lives into having buildings like this. I'm so happy this building is still here. I had the honour of talking to you today. I had the privilege of being able to work here this afternoon. It's a fantastic place. I think these days, in the echo chambers we live in, it's a question of either use it or lose it. So please do keep coming in. Please do keep on using the archives. It's that important. Thank you very much for having me.